Funding for the production of Public Square provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, working to improve the lives of vulnerable children.
And those are all questions, but this discussion is about early childhood.
No, this discussion is about funding.
The growth of need is out of control. The spiral is growing so big.
One thing I do want to mention is that New Mexico is a poor state.
There's like a little saying you hear out there. The more you invest in the playpen, the more you're going to save at the state pen. and it's a matter of a paradigm shift.
You ever ask yourself how much money would be enough money? And then your question is, for what?
He's pulling out a figure.
Well, we have a study to tell you how much money.
And Alan, and if we fund this one, then what other programs?
No, there will not be enough. There will not be enough.
There will not be enough.
There will not be enough. So because there's not going to be enough, let's do nothing.
Everyone seems to agree with us. Why don't we have the political will?
It's just the remedy is very complex.
Welcome to Public Square, where civic dialogue takes center stage, where real people meet with leaders to discuss and solve important community issues.
What I hear about people opting out of the job place because they can't afford to, I understand, but really the big investment for children comes when the mother is able to work.
Today, we'll explore the significant challenges to accessing affordable, quality child care. We'll hear from parents and daycare providers about the challenges they're facing. And we'll also hear from advocates who say providing quality child care very early in a child's life is crucial to ensuring success for that child later on. After that, we'll explore how we can ensure children are getting the care and nurturing they need with Senator Sue Wilson Beffert, Representative Jimmy Hall, and Yolanda Dinas, Secretary of the Children, Youth, and Families Department. Before we get started, here's more information on our topic.
I wanted to come and talk about this issue today because, according to Workforce Solutions, 67% of families in New Mexico need full-time care for their children while they work and go to school. So the question of affordability and accessibility to quality child care is of vital importance to the state of New Mexico.
The first years of a child's life are crucial for brain development. Achievement gaps show up very early, and kids who start behind often stay behind. The resulting costs are high. Children who did not get quality early education tend to repeat grades or take remedial classes more often. They probably won't earn as much and will be more likely to become teen parents or be incarcerated.
If children don't have access to good child care, our educational system is already really struggling. And if we don't get that early, strong foundation for kids, our future generations are really going to suffer.
The return on investment of quality early child care and education is as high as $16 for every dollar spent, according to Federal Reserve economists. But funding for early childhood programs in New Mexico was cut in the recession, including money for lower-income parents.
If you have to pay $3 or $4 an hour for your child to be in a daycare, that's going to take a lot of your money out and leave less for you to be able to support your family.
Before the cuts, parents making up to 200% of federal poverty guidelines could get state help. Budget cuts reduced that to those making 100% of poverty. This year, the legislature increased funding for early childhood programs, but not enough to make up for earlier cuts. Some 5,000 children remain on the waiting list for state assistance. Payments to providers were also reduced, and more centers have closed.
It's a challenge providing high-quality early childhood services for children when their families pay for fees based on a sliding fee scale. It leaves a burden on us to find partners, foundations, grants, conduct fundraisers in order to reach the difference between what our parents are able to pay and the cost of quality care.
We've lost 5 centers in Roswell in the past 3 years, and if more centers close down, we're going to see more and more children who become latchkey kids or who become children who just are turned loose on the street because they have no one watching out for them, or they go to underground care where most of the care is subpar because they don't have anyone that really has any idea what is best for children to be doing.
A 2010 poll asked, is New Mexico doing too little to ensure children enter kindergarten with the skills they need? 60% of business and community leaders agreed, and 83% of tribal leaders, but only 37% of legislators agreed.
It's an issue that if we as a society concentrated on it, it would solve a lot of the social issues that we currently have. And at the same time, it would improve and better the economic well-being of the country. It's just a win-win all the way around. And it's so simple that we just can't seem to grasp it.
I want to start out talking to our parents. I would like to hear from you all about the challenges that you have faced finding child care, what decisions you've made based on how much that cost, how difficult it was.
First and foremost, I think it's important to mention that child care is expensive. At the time that I became active with the organization, Ole, New Mexico, I had just lost child care assistance through the CYFD. So my employer allowed me to work less than full time in order to continue to try to qualify. And that actually happened several times while I was
so you decreased your salary so you could still qualify for state
I decreased
subsidies.
my salary in order to keep child care subsidies.
How did that impact your professional career?
I'm sure in the long run it definitely hurt it because there were less clients I was able to see. I actually worked in early intervention, so I was working with families of young children. So there were children that lost their services because I wasn't able to provide services in my field. But eventually I lost the subsidy altogether, the CYFD funding. So at that point, I basically had to balance my children among family members. A real sad experience I had, my child, I went to pick her up, and we were walking by a store, and she said, "Oh, Giada, some cooking show," and I'm like, I want my child to learn to read and write and play with kids. I don't want her to know the Food Network. I'm sorry. I don't have TV. I don't allow my kids to watch TV. So to see my children being victims of television, that really said a lot to me about, getting my kids into an environment that was structured and devoted toward early childhood development.
I think you want to make sure that your child is in a safe environment. You want to make sure that your child, is getting the best head start. And I went to youth development. I get services like from 8 to 3. It would be great to talk about some of those wraparound services because if some of the agencies were able to collaborate more, the state was able to collaborate more, you would be able to leave your child in one place.
Christina, you decided, I think, to stay home?
Yes.
Instead of...
For me, it was kind of thinking, do I go to work full time and make, I don't know, just saying $100 a week, and I have to pay like $80. So what am I gaining? What am I getting out of my work? So I decided to stay at home. I work part-time with the partnership, doing the surveys, and also with the program Communities for Education in Action.
And what the survey that you're doing, you're surveying families in the southwest part of Albuquerque about how they're using child care or if they can access child care.
Yes.
I know you aren't done with the survey yet, but can you give us some sense of what you're finding? Or is it difficult for families right now?
For most of our families, some they have Social Security, and some of them not. So it's hard for them to find a place to send their kids to school, to pre-K or school or daycare. So usually they send the kids to grandma's house, to aunties, the neighborhood, some informal daycare. Unfortunately for me, I don't have anyone to do that. So I get to bond more with my kids and also advocate for my kids' education in the future and right now.
I want to talk to the providers. We have a few here. I gather centers are still struggling. I would like to hear some of the challenges that you're facing right now.
Okay. I can speak to the challenges of operating a center where the vast majority of families that we serve are on state subsidy. It's actually a federal program called the Child Care Development Block Grant, and every 2 years the state conducts a market rate survey. And based on the market rate survey, they determine what we will be reimbursed for the services that we provide. and the federal government recommends that they pay no less than the 75th percentile. It's been quite a long time since CYFD has touched that. It's particularly very low among infant and toddler care. Some of that's not even at the 50 percentile of what market rate is. The state's far, far below the market rate. And the market rate is determined by what parents are able to pay, and of course New Mexico's the 47th poorest state in the nation, so the market doesn't bear very much. You know, families need to have something left over after they pay their care.
And you're in Truth or Consequences, so it's a
Yes.
more rural area. What
Yes.
what is the situation like down there in terms of access?
Well, we are the only nationally accredited center. We're the only child-based center, child care center in the county. We're full day year-round, but there are dozens. I don't know the current figure, but over 40 what's called a registered provider. That's also a provider that the state pays for, but they are not licensed. There's a home provider that the state reimburses at a much, much lower rate. So most families in our community will access unlicensed or unregistered care just because the capacity is not there. Even relative care or children in self-care. We do the countywide summer lunch program. It's not uncommon for a 10-year-old to come with their 4-year-old and 2-year-old sibling to come get a free lunch at the park.
So if you're not getting reimbursed at what you say is the 75th percentile, how do you make that up? I mean, then you rely on private pay?
That's a very good question. It'd be a great question for Jerry to answer.
I don't know how else you'd make it up unless you ask your private pay.
Well, our center just this year decided to no longer accept state-subsidized children. And
How much of that is your business?
About 25%. We're in a very fortunate position, unlike Rebecca. We're the oldest preschool and kindergarten in New Mexico. We do take infants. That infant-toddler area is so undermanned in New Mexico that just recently I met a lady that's all she has is infant and toddlers. And I could fill 4 classrooms with infant and toddlers if I had the building. But
so there's just not enough centers.
There is not enough centers. In Roswell, we've lost 5 in the past 3 years.
Why?
Due to economics. But the difficulty in making this decision is we have always taken state-subsidized children. But because, as Rebecca said, the market rate survey is so much lower than what we charge, that when you're losing $100 a month per child and you have 42 children, anywhere from 40 to 50, depending on what time of year it is, on state subsidy, that really cuts into any kind of improvements you want to make, insurance, taxes, payroll taxes, and it has just become almost impossible. We pay more than any other center in Roswell. We are a nationally accredited 5-star national all-star school.
You pay more?
We pay more in wages.
Oh, okay.
Because our teachers are highly educated. Most of our teachers have been with us for 15 up to 25 years. And it is just really difficult to tell a parent it's going to cost you $140 to $150 a week for your infant, because our area in Roswell, we don't have very much industry, but we've had industry that has wanted to come in, but because we don't have enough child care, our workforce has suffered for it.
Deborah, you operate the Head Start program at YDI. This is a little bit different than what Rebecca and Jerry are doing. Tell me a little bit more about it. Is it federally funded? So are you facing the same kind of economic pressures?
Of course.
Okay.
Youth Development provides early Head Start and Head Start services. We're the largest provider in the state of New Mexico, and so it is federally funded, and the services are free to income-eligible families. We started doing recruitment for our fall program in April, and we're 60% full. And by the next month, we'll be full for the fall program.
What's the income guidelines?
100% of poverty or below.
Okay. Wow. So you're almost full
we're
just at that. So
right.
what about the people who are 100% to 200%?
They go on a waiting list.
Okay.
And then there's a point system. But, I know what my colleagues are talking about because we actually looked at providing those wraparound services that Ernestine talked about using child care subsidies. But because our teachers are all degreed in early childhood education, we provide a very good fringe benefit package. We want to do that for our employees. And because of all of the Head Start performance standards and the quality and accreditation, all of our centers are accredited, we couldn't make that money work for the wraparound services and provide the same kind of quality that the Head Start provides. And so it's really difficult, and I know what they're talking about because we've tried to put those figures to paper and it just didn't work out. We would be in a deficit.
We have a couple of people, sort of the business world, in different ways you two have sought to provide some kind of daycare for your employees. Susan, can you talk a little bit about why you do that and what it looks like?
When we started, this was 18 years ago, and we were all having babies. It was one of those things that it was, and what I found really interesting from a personal story is that, I have a master's degree in education and everything was separate, right? Your daycare was separate from your work situation. And I work with a lot of low-income women, almost all of them are Latina, and I remember going to a meeting going, gosh, I'm not really sure what we're going to do, I'm pregnant. And they go, well, that's just great, and they could just continued on. I mean, work and family life, it was not a separate thing. It's not like you go to seek something out like you were saying. It's something you deal with in your family, and how do you make this work? But at the same time, to be able to focus on work and be productive and have your children be in a safe space, we said, well, we should start an on-site child care. And many of the economic development programs across the world that we model ourselves after use the theory of change, which if you're going to have an impact on poverty and children, you focus on the mother's ability to earn income. And what I hear about people opting out of the job place because they can't afford to, I understand, but really the big investment for children comes when the mother is able to work all over the world. So this is something that we struggle with. So we started an on-site daycare.
It seems like a huge undertaking.
Well, it sort of was and it sort of wasn't, because on one hand, we went and followed all of the licensing requirements that you need to follow with the state, but because there are children on our site, we don't have the same requirements. And, it is sort of two heads. You're doing a daycare on one hand and you're trying to run a business on the other hand.
But was it worth it?
I think it's really worth it, and I think what we get is in terms of women being able to work, and our children who are often what you would consider an at-risk population of the kids in the schools, we have a 98% graduation rate from high school. So, and 85% of those kids are going on to college. So I do believe it's a huge, it's worth it. There's a writer, Jody Heyman, who wrote Profit at the Bottom of the Ladder, which is a great way about how when you invest in your employees on certain fronts, your business is more productive. So on one hand, it's the government. On the other, I think it's a social value of all of us to make it work, because it really does have a benefit for the children and our future and our workforce and parents' peace of mind of having happy kids.
Julian, is investing in your employees that way, do you think, been profitable to your business?
When I bought the center some 15, 18 years ago.
So you bought a child care center?
A child care center.
While you were running McDonald's restaurant?
Right.
Okay.
I thought at the time that owning a child care, I could provide the employees an opportunity to pay, at that time, $3 an hour or $2.50 an hour for child care. Well, that worked for a little while, and then the other employees said, well, wait a minute. You're giving them a benefit, and they said, well,
so they wanted something too?
Right. The other issue is that it's a full-time business to run a child care center, and that was not my core business. Mm-hmm. So I had to, keep it at a minimal level. At times, I've had to support the center by infusing money, because sometimes it doesn't pay for itself. And it hurts me when I hear that parents with infant toddlers are having to pay $500-600 a month just for one child. And if they bring two, it's close to $1,000. And I quickly do the numbers, right? If a person making $12 an hour, it's about $25,000-26,000 a year. They pay $12,000 for child care a year. So that brings their scale down to $14,000. Then they pay $600 or $700 for rent, which is $8,400. You subtract that from $14,000, so you're down to $6,000 a year. Then they have car payments of $200 or $300 a month. So say $250, that's another $4,000. So that brings it down to, what, $2,000. And then food is going to take $200 to $300 a month, so that's another $3,000. So
you've got some stressed employees.
Pretty soon they're not making enough money to live on. To Christine's point, when she saw that, she couldn't afford to work and pay all that out and end up with less, she had to do what she did. I think that somehow or other public and private entities have to get together and find a way to make it affordable. The thing that got me involved in early childhood, Polly Turner, one of the professors at University of New Mexico, came to ABEC one day.
Wait, that is
at the Albuquerque Business Education Compact. And she had a graph that I thought told the whole story. And the graph was timeline as time goes on, right? The malleability of the brain comes down like this, so that the first 5 years are really critical. And then at 6, right, we as a society spend most of our money public education. Public education starts at 6, right? There used to be. Started at 6. That's when we put in most of our money. Well, guess what? The horse is out of the barn, basically. I mean, you've invested the money.
You've already lost momentum.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, and I use computer ease to get people to understand that the first 5 years are used to build their hard drives. And we've learned that computers with hard drives, bigger hard drives, are able to do more at the end. It's very simple.
That's a great segue into what I consider our advocates here, Alan Sanchez and Sharon Kane. Talk about what Julian was just saying, Alan. You were agreeing exactly. You have supported our New Mexico PBS program, Raising Readers.
We want kids to read. Everybody wants kids to read.
And we thank you for that.
Thank you.
Why is it so critical to support 0 through 5?
Yeah. Julian hit the nail on the head. And it's very clear. As we get older, we put more money in education, and that's when you actually learn less. If we invest upstream, we save downstream. There's like a little saying you hear out there. The more you invest in the playpen, the more you're going to save at the state pen. and it's a matter of a paradigm shift. Everybody agrees. We all agree. And we'll bring in any legislator in here, and they will agree that this is where we need to do it. Then why aren't we doing it?
Well, what is happening?
Well, what's happening is
are we doing this?
We're not. We are lacking tremendously. We haven't even refunded what's been cut since 2008. We haven't even refunded that. But we've gone to the public, and we did a Sanderoff poll, a Brian Sanderoff poll, which most people accept as a very credible poll. And it's in the 80s that the people of New Mexico are saying we got to put the money in with the children. So we got to find the source of the money. Now there doesn't seem to be a political will for any taxes. There isn't, So how do we invest for, let's say, 10 years? So then we can do the paradigm shift and reappropriate downstream where you're saving money. Like for remedial classes. Let's decrease the need for them by going upstream. And if there's less need, then you have a place you can take money and nobody's going to scream.
So can you prove that, Alan, when you go to
legislators? The studies are there. We've done studies
around
the country. You have to do an investment before you can do the reappropriation. Otherwise, you're going to have everybody screaming. Like St. Joe's. We shut down 18 programs because we prioritize saying, we're spending all this money downstream and they've already missed the bus. We got to go upstream. And there was a lot of anger. A lot of people upset because you shut down 18 programs to go upstream.
These are programs dealing with people who are older.
Many areas. St. Joe's had a lot of programs going on. So, we even sold the hospital to say, hey, how do we actually go upstream? How about selling the hospital to a for-profit and taking their money and spend it on children to keep them out of the hospital? So that's what we've done. We created an $85 million trust, and it's all spent on this age group from 0 to 5. But in our state, we can do the same thing. There's a source of money without a new tax to do the paradigm shift. We have a fund called the Land Grant Permanent Fund, the second largest in the nation dedicated to education. And all we're saying is, let's expand the definition of education to include the little guys.
Where an education from what, K through?
Well, right now
it's K through higher ed.
Pre-K through higher ed. And this fund is like no other fund. Now, yes, it's going to grow slower if we do this. We're going to be honest about it. It's going to grow slower. But the investment that you make is greater than what's going to happen in the fund. Now, somebody told me, at St. Joe's, will you dip into your foundation money like that, your money like that? And I'd say, no, because I don't have 150 years of oil in the ground waiting for me. But the state does. This fund grows not just by investment, and that's what we got to tell the people. We're not just looking at the investment return in the market, which is not a permanent investment, okay? We've all learned that, and this is supposed to be a permanent fund. But rather, it also grows investment from funds coming in and royalties. And those gas and royalties are huge that are coming into New Mexico. But
so the legislation that you all were backing, many of you backed.
We're still supporting it. We're coming back with it.
It didn't pass this year. What would it have done?
For 10 years, we take $150 million a year going into 0 to 5 programs, which would fund these programs we're talking about right now. You create jobs. You create safe place for children. We've done the paradigm shift. And I guarantee you if we do this, all the studies show, when our kids get to 3rd grade, they're going to be reading. And then we don't have to do the most expensive thing of repeating a year. That's the most expensive option.
Yeah. So in 10 years, we'll have 3rd graders who have been, they've been in these programs since birth.
That's what I want.
And so we'll have a real knowledge of, how much better they're doing than today's 3rd graders.
So we'll come back and talk with the leadership team. We can talk about possible solutions. I want to throw out a question to everyone as we bring our leadership folks in. Why is this important? What is at stake if we don't make sure that all the children in New Mexico are getting the appropriate child care from 0 to 5 to stimulate their brains?
I think it's very simple. We continue to spend a lot of money on a lot of social issues. And if we don't fix this now in terms of dealing with early childhood, because for every dollar invested, you get 10 times return on your investment. And what I'm talking about is dropout rates continue to increase, crime continues to increase, recidivism continues to increase, less young people, number of young people are going to college. The educational level of the country seems to be going down. The economic development and the economic growth of this country is slowing and growing down. I think that's the reason why we need to fix this issue now.
I view it as the age-old adage of the haves and the have-nots, because unfortunately the haves have the funding. There is money. Some examples, increasing the tax ceiling, that
increasing the tax ceiling.
Something that Obama gets a lot of backlash for,
okay.
Taxing the rich. There's a lot of money that can come into our governmental system to fund things. Closing corporate loopholes. So it's like the old adage of the haves. There is money available. And unfortunately, we who are advocating for the children are tending to fall under have-nots.
Secretary Dinas, CYFD oversees much of the child care infrastructure that we have in the state, right? Or a good portion of it.
Actually, CYFD oversees all of it,
okay.
Except for that isn't licensed and is providing services under the table.
What are the challenges? I mean, what can we do to make sure that we have more children getting into these services and they're not left by the wayside?
Well, funding is always an issue. It's been difficult. I have some really committed staff that have been working the numbers to the very best of their ability. We're looking at making the adjustments where we've sent out letters to families that have that are in the up to the 125% of federal poverty. So extending an open invitation to them to come back in, that we're able to now serve them. Unfortunately, we haven't had a great response. I suppose the other side of that is it allows us to keep moving up that waiting list to a higher level on the federal poverty rate.
Where does the money come from for child care?
A large portion of it is what we get from our general funds. We also get a lot of federal subsidy, but there is a limit where we had the stimulus money, where we had all kinds of supplemental funding that allowed us to take it to 200%. But all that money has dried up, so we have to rely on our existing resources. I think the answer we need to give New Mexico society, our New Mexico residents, is that investing in our kids is investing in the future of New Mexico. That's the bottom line. Mm-hmm. Because all of us sitting here, sooner or later, are going to be on the Medicare rolls, and we're going to be retired, and we're not going to be the ones contributing. And if we don't invest early in helping those kids to develop those neurons, to develop the brain that can absorb information and learn, then we're harming ourselves.
Everyone seems to agree with us. Why don't we have the political will? Is that the wrong word? Do we have the political will?
The whole country is very reactive. We like punitive measures. We would rather spend more money putting people in jail than spending less money making sure they can get a job and they're educated. That's just the way our country is.
I would have to say that that's not the mindset of the legislature. In fact, when I came up over a decade ago, we only had half-day kindergarten. That's all we had in New Mexico. We passed the full-day kindergarten. We passed pre-K. We have fought to make sure that CYFD gets parity. In other words, half goes to the private child care centers, half goes to public education, because the child care centers are all intertwined with babies and the other areas that if these centers close. I mean, I'm taken back to hear that Roswell had such a happenstance of closing.
Olay did a survey last year. I mean, a number of them have closed around the state.
But, but so we now have Kindergarten Plus. We have home visiting. We did go through the recession, and we have certain programs that we cannot change in any way. For instance, Medicaid is a mandate. It's a federal mandate, so that
we have to match.
Yes.
Okay.
But one thing I do want to mention is that New Mexico is a poor state. We are not full of corporate headquarters. We do not have major wealth in New Mexico. In fact, most of the employers, over 90%, are small employers. In fact, many of them aren't even corporations. They're just a little guy next door who's fixing bicycles and your neighbors and different things. So universal is a problem for many legislators.
Universal pre-K or universal?
Universal, period, in terms of where we, this poor state that we are, if we have a program that goes to just anyone, that means less money for the poorest, for the single moms that need it the most. And I really hope that the advocate group is going to start seeing that we can't have universal access for all of these programs, or else we are defeating the purpose of the dropout and the crime rate and the recidivism and that sort of thing.
So what's the answer if we?
Well, it should be means-based.
Means, yeah.
So like the child care subsidies go to a certain amount of poverty.
It still leaves a large chunk of working parents who can't afford.
Well, and yet we have participation that has graduated with co-pays. I can remember it was just a few years ago that it was a cliff, and many of us on the Human Services Committee kept saying, we can't have this cliff where you make $1 more, and I heard one of the nice ladies here say that, she had to step back at her job so she could continue her child care. So we've been begging.
It's not an unusual story, I think.
Yeah.
No, okay.
But I think that it's key to remember that just a few years ago, New Mexico was 48th in the nation as far as child care.
And where are we now?
We're at 30.
Okay.
So we've made
In regards to what?
Yeah, child care, quality.
But okay.
And safety. Both of those things. And so we've moved ahead, and in that process we've been able to gain some credibility in terms of the services that are being provided. But ultimately, unless we get some kind of windfall, I really was trying for that multi-million-dollar lottery. I was going to put it all back into our New Mexico child care program.
Before you guys came in, we talked about one possible windfall, but I gather our legislators, neither of you supported that. Could you talk about that? The one Alan was talking about, the land grant.
The fund, I don't think, is as strong as what Alan said, because yes, we're getting royalties, but those royalties are down. So the money coming in is not as great as it used to be. And I would not want to stake anything, any one child's future, on saying that there's 150 years of oil reserves and gas reserves out there. Because until you can go underground and count the barrels of oil or the cubic feet of gas, we don't know. And we've got 21 recipients of the fund right now.
Which are mostly education?
Mostly education.
And it's mostly public education, higher
ed? Yes. The big one is public education. But I have a real concern when we start talking about going to the fund for this or for that, because when you start talking about the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf, right now they are the neediest of the needs whenever it comes to what we need to be funding. And I also disagree with Alan in that what I've seen as far as estimates on the fund and what's growing, and if y'all can tell me what the stock market's going to be doing over the next day, then we might could figure out what we'll do tomorrow. Let alone talk to me about what it's going to be doing over the next 10 years.
All right, is the proposal, the legislation that was put forward, would that take money away from the 21 recipients? Okay.
The blind and the deaf, at the end of the session, endorsed the legislation.
Okay.
They came around to see that all boats float in this bill. So there's a cliff coming to the funding for the School for the Blind and the Deaf. And this repairs that cliff that's coming and actually increases the distribution to them. But the point that we're making is we don't want to tap it, we don't want to hurt the fund that exists there. But what we're talking about is the royalty coming in as an investment. And any good business would say, if you're going to start an investment, the worst thing you could do is be undercapitalized. That'll kill you. And this is what we're talking about, a change.
An example of our precious permanent funds, our severance tax permanent fund, which is all from the extract industry, the gas and oil and other minerals and so on.
Which brings in about 40% of our revenue.
We started intercepting that some years ago, and now less than 5% of the money coming in is going into the fund. So that fund is finished.
Where's it going?
And the corpus is going to dwindle, so we basically have ruined that fund. And I want to mention that last year we had over $450 million of money spinning out from the corpus that went to education. And so, we're trying. I will tell you, we spent, 11.9% more on early childhood programs this last year in the budget. The first year that our budget, that our economy started coming back, we pushed more money.
But that doesn't take us back to where we even were with the cuts. Right. But I agree with you when you're saying about we're a very poor state, a small state.
Let me talk to you about the cuts, Alan. When we did the constitutional amendment, I think it was in 2003, we were told that if we did this and we got this extra money, it would go for education, and we would see all of these changes in education. My first term, when that is exactly where I'm going.
That's a good point.
Because it's supplanted, but just like the senator's saying, the money is taken or hijacked for all these other causes. And so whenever you start talking about funds for education, even if you were to do this, and there's constitutional questions about the Enabling Act and some others, and there's potential lawsuits, because I think even though the School for the Blind, School for the Deaf may have endorsed it, Alan, they still have a concern about the future of the fund. So it's not just them. I think UNM. I think
we don't have any opposed.
Well, what do you think should happen?
Even if you designate, take the tobacco money settlement.
Yeah.
It's practically gone into the general fund now, and it's
Is it because
basically
it's
gone.
not designated?
I'd like to address what the representative said, which was some true statements there to build on. For one thing, this isn't just any program. We're not asking to create a new beneficiary. We're not.
I understand.
That's important. That's different. See, there are the 22 beneficiaries.
And that's where I would disagree with you, because even where we increased the distribution in 2003, it was to go to education. We weren't changing the beneficiaries.
This fund is so small, the funding here is so small that you can't supplant it.
Yes, you can.
Even if you took the $30 million that's spent on early childhood, you're still $120 million ahead.
Alan, I was there whenever we had to cut the budget and nothing was off limits. And we cut, and we would have gone after this money. We would have gone after this money.
Unfortunately, I think the government is very short-sighted in thinking that we'll cut early child, we're cutting all of these programs for the people who are the most needy.
I have a question, and I have a real concern about getting this into the have and have-nots, because when my constituents come to me with an autistic child that's not in a program, are they or have not? Those parents that are on the DD waiver program, was there 4,000 or 5,000 on there? Are they have or have nots? And then, or what about some of the special needs programs for those kids that are above the school age limit now? And those are all funding.
Questions, but this discussion is about early childhood.
No, this discussion is about funding.
But as a legislature, we have to look at every single pocket.
Program.
Right. Do we want to, we have police, we have all of these very important services that we have to fund, and when you take a look at the overall budget, and like I mentioned, Medicaid has just consumed us in terms of
But do all of them have, there's a lot of data on the return on early childhood. Do all the programs that we fund have those kinds of return on investment?
Would you ask that question to a parent of a autistic child?
But does it have to be either
I'll ask you a question again.
No, of course I wouldn't.
Okay.
I'm asking you, does it have to be between the autistic child and the early child? Is there a third way here?
Or do we cut
there
education?
is actually. There's another huge pool of money that nobody ever talks about.
Okay.
We spend $5.5 billion a year directly, and we spend almost as much indirectly on tax cuts and deductions, and nobody ever talks about that.
So
some of those are good programs, like the working family tax credit, the low income tax.
So those should be evaluated to see if they're worth.
We are one of the few states that does not evaluate them or even look at the combined cost over the year. And the legislature, to your credit, you've passed 2 years now in a row, passed a statute that would make the state create a tax expenditure budget, and Governor Richardson and Governor Martinez both have vetoed them. But that's a lot of money to spend and not even know what you're really spending it on, and is it creating the jobs we thought it would create when we first gave out that tax credit? And some of them are for just ridiculous things.
Rebecca's been wanting to talk for a while.
There's also the issue of, are we maximizing existing resources? Are we preventing duplication of efforts? Earlier we heard a mom talk about accessing Head Start for part of the day and finding a private provider for the other part of the day. Instead of, or when he says, what would you say to the autistic child? One example in the Birth to 3 program is that families get some respite care. And that respite care has to happen in the home at a price of $10 to $14 an hour per child. But that same parent is not allowed to take that autistic child to a nationally accredited child care center like myself that would charge $3 an hour to the state for them to be in a social setting with typically developing children. Mm-hmm. So there are changes in existing programs, in existing state programs that would maximize resources. Families will come to our program and benefit from a pre-K program for 480 hours out of the year that also have to pay for full-time private child care outside of that time because they're 155% of poverty. But looking at it would make more sense to fully fund programs where parents need it most and to assure that those programs are of the highest quality than to create new silos that have new administrative overhead, new state offices.
Secretary Dynas, the CYFD is applying for the Race to the Top grant. So what would that do? Would this address anything that we're talking about? How much money would that bring to the state?
I believe that would bring in about $25 million. And what it would do would be to help us provide services over a larger range of the state. A key component to that is our tiered quality rating system. And so that is a key piece, because what they're looking for are those early learning programs, those programs that are geared towards that brain development and to stimulating the preparation for learning.
So would it put that kind of infrastructure in place to...
It would help us put some infrastructure in place. It would also help us to expand existing programs so that they could provide those services.
There's states all over the country now working on this.
Well,
are there other ways?
There are other ways, but I don't see the political will to be able, like we're not gonna reverse the Richardson cuts.
The tax cuts.
Those tax cuts. I don't see the political will for that to happen. And we've done some polling. The polling all goes back to this permanent fund. And what I want to say is, I agree with Senator Bedford that we are a very small, poor state. But land-wise, we're one of the largest, and gas and oil are one of the largest. And one thing I'll guarantee you, gas and oil eventually goes up because they're not making any more of it. We need to take that very large wealth that exists out there. New Mexico is the 5th largest oil producer in the country. Take that wealth and just invest it for 10 years and change the paradigm. And then we'll start attracting businesses back into New Mexico, because we're going to have a workforce. It's going to have to say, we're going to at some point, how do we find that capital? We're not going to find it in a tax. We're not going to find it nickel and diming many other little taxes that we have. We're going to have to say we do this, and after the 10 years, we do the hard work of reappropriating. You mentioned we're going to always have to pay for police. But if we reduce crime, reduce that crime, less there. Juvenile justice system takes them from there. The children repeating grade level takes them from there. The remedial classes, kids are going to college and they're repeating high school because they're having to take 2 years of remedial classes. It's taking them 6 years to get their diploma. We got to at some point say, how do we agree that we got to make a paradigm shift? And where do you get the capital? Like any good investment, any good business, if it's undercapitalized, it will fail. And we're failing because it's undercapitalized. And the permanent fund, I do worry about it. But the growth of need is out of control. The spiral is growing so big that it's growing faster than what that fund will ever grow. Well, and in 20 years, that fund will be weaker, even if we don't touch a penny of it. It'll be weaker because the need is so great that you don't have enough money to serve.
Can you just explain quickly for our guests, for our viewers who understand? So the permanent fund is royalties from oil and gas.
Gas and oil, and we got a lot
and investments on Wall Street.
Okay.
It has 2 sources of income.
Yeah. Okay.
But what we know there is if it's called a permanent fund, it should have a permanent effect. And there's far more permanent effect in investing in the society because of those outcomes than investing in the stock market.
You ever ask yourself how much money would be enough money? And then your question is, for what?
He's pulling out a figure.
Well, we have a study to tell you how much money.
No, and Alan, and I'm telling you, let's just talk about this program. Is there going to be enough money for there? And if we fund this one, then what other program?
No, there will not be enough. There will not be enough.
There will not be enough.
There will not be enough. So because there's not going to be enough, let's do nothing.
There's not
but
enough.
Representative Hall, going to Alan's point, do you agree that investing in early childhood would be extremely important?
If we had the funding, yes. Without
the
risk
of
going.
I've done several studies on this, and I know this isn't a popular idea, but I took my education in Oklahoma, and with a Republican governor, they set up all of their early childhood services through the lottery. And the reason they did that is because they were proving that early childhood was more beneficial to children than college, because it costs the same amount to send a child to the first 4 years of their education as it does the last 4 years, which usually it takes 6 years for college. And with New Mexico being such a poor state, I know the land grant fund is a huge fight, but if we're seeing 73% of the young people who, after the first year, is that correct, Rebecca, drop out of the lottery scholarship, why are we using 100% of that lottery money to fund that? Why don't we move some of it to early childhood? That way, possibly by the time that child got to college, it wouldn't be 73% dropout. It would be maybe 10%.
What do you guys think of that?
Well, and that would be a legislative fix, and there are some senators that precious little, if any, change to the lottery scholarships has ever been considered.
And we're also very proud of the fact that in New Mexico, if you qualify, meaning that you graduate from high school, you are guaranteed, if you don't drop out or whatever, but you are guaranteed a college education. In the legislature, it has been a slow step building educational process. I can remember when we put the full-day kindergarten bill on, and I put it on, I had people saying that it was babysitting. And so now what we're seeing is the marvelous results, and in pre-K it was supposed to start in a very small sector. Now everybody wants pre-K. So, and all of these people that may have been against it at that time, we are now bringing more and more people into the fold of understanding the concept. It's just the remedy is very complex.
You know, I'm one of the poorest of the poor in this state. I'll admit it. For me, what would be enough is enough that I have a roof over my head, I have food to eat, my children have a quality of life, they have the right to play, they have the right to explore. To me, that's enough. But because of all of these budget shortcuts and choosing the wrong things to cut, in my opinion, I'm left having to decide. Do I get groceries, or do I have to pay the $1,000 a month child care? Do I choose full-time work and a productive citizenship, or do I pay full-time child care? You know, so to me, enough is just the basic quality of life, to survive and enjoy life with my children.
And you're right for this discussion, but I can also have this discussion with the autistic community. I can have the same discussion with the D.D. Weber community. And so when you put all those, how much is going to be enough, it's an astronomical sum that the state has no way of ever reaching.
You know, Secretary had it right. I think New Mexico has made a lot of headways. We've got 11% more money into this, but we need to set a target.
What kind of target?
In terms of when we're going to shift, because back to Representative Hall's indication, I also have an autistic grandson, so I understand those issues. On the other hand, if we do the paradigm shift as Ellen has suggested, we could save the money that we're spending at this end to take care of the autistic, to take care of all the other programs that we support. So in this case, if we just took the hit, get it done, do the paradigm shift as we talk about, get some folks involved, find a creative way, lottery or whatever it is, and then we can begin to see the savings 10 years later. Because it takes, by the time the child is 6, 7, it graduates in 10 years, you will begin to see a lot of the benefits. So it's a question of when do we take the hit.
I want to thank you all for taking time to come and talk about this and having a great discussion and a civil discussion and dialogue. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone agrees that we have to do something. Now we got to come together and do some compromising to get to a real solution.
I don't think that there's a solution out there. Not from this discussion. It kind of seems like everybody, you know, they haven't quite thought it out yet.
I thought that it would be more productive. I thought that legislators had options and alternatives, when really it was more like, we reject your alternatives, and if there were funding and if we had a good economy, maybe it would be a priority.
Early childhood education is important, and we are moving that way. And I don't know I'm convinced that a rate on the permanent fund, the lottery, or any other that we talked about today are the correct ways to go about it.
All we're asking the legislators to do is discern, is this something worthy of a public debate to be on the ballot? Are you going to let the people of New Mexico decide this or not?
Growing the economy would help with increased revenues into the state, and the passion of most legislators is to put the funds in education.
I think that if we don't fully fund or prioritize early childhood education, that we're really going to pay for it in the long run.
You become numb to hearing that 40% do not graduate high school. There should be this giant bell ringing somewhere saying this is an alarm. How are we going to support 40% of the people that don't graduate? Where are they going to work? There's nothing more important in the next 30 years in New Mexico than talking about our children.
Join us for Public Square on the last Thursday of every month. To participate in Public Square and for more information, go to newmexicopbs.org and look for Public Square under Local Productions. Here you can give us feedback or suggest topics. Also, look for us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching.